Incredible revelation. Millionaire's blind daughter thrown into snake pit, but a horse's amazing grace saves her life. Ethan Roberts read the headline 3 times, the words blurring into a haze of disbelief. Millionaire? Snake pit? His mind raced, a maelstrom of confusion. He was just a vet in a sleepy town, caring for animals and dreaming of a life that felt constantly out of reach. But now, it seemed the past he had buried had come back to him like a dog on his tail, relentless and inevitable. His heart thumped heavily in his chest as he finally processed the words. Sarah, his sister, who he never even knew existed. The thought churned uneasily in his stomach. How could he possibly have a blind sister trapped in a nightmare while he tended to the everyday maelstrom of dogs in need of care? The decision loomed large and dark. Am I responsible for this unknown sibling? The idea of stepping into a world of wealth and the cruel games that played there left a bitter taste in his mouth. Ethan wrestled within himself, grappling with years of feeling inadequate, feeling privileged lives were simply out of his reach. And now he was tangled in this web of betrayal and greed, all because of a father he had estranged himself from. He remembered a patient dog, frail and shaking, brought in once by a woman from the town. She'd begged him to save her. He had, of course. His world revolved around saving the defenseless. But this was different. Could he protect someone he had never known, trapped in an estate where shadows lingered in every corner? The weight of his family's legacy pressed down. What if his inaction led to something terrible? His hands instinctively fisted, nails biting into his palms. Before we continue, I need to tell you about something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to the system, and many people are losing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and mark all notifications so you don't miss the next videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now let's continue. A heavy sigh escaped him, filling the small clinic that bore witness to his turmoil. An instinct stirred deep within, a potent mix of fear and determination. This was not just a family secret, it was a call to arms. He had to confront the dark truths hidden among the walls of that opulent estate, where his father's greed had snuffed out any light for Sarah. Ethan's thoughts spiraled as he recalled the stories of millionaires he'd heard, cutthroat and merciless. Just yesterday, a child had brought in a wounded rabbit, and he'd felt that familiar spark of purpose. But would he feel the same for his sister? As he blinked hard, pushing away the swelling emotions, the image of Sarah in that pit, surrounded by danger, gnawed at him. Could he become the protector she so desperately needed? Already uneasiness seeped into his bones, mingling with guilt and dread. He realized as he stared blankly at the wall that this was not simply about her survival. It was about his redemption from the very notion of inadequacy. The stakes only grew higher, reality beginning to twist as he ventured upon the treacherous journey ahead. Ethan felt unmoored. His grip on the ordinary was slipping. With every lingering thought, his resolve intensified. How was he going to rise to this challenge? Would he find a way to save Sarah from not just the pit, but from the legacy of their father? The answer hung heavily in the air, teasing the edges of his conscience as he braced for the oncoming storm, in a fight that demanded every ounce of his spirit. There was no turning back now, only the chilling embrace of the unknown drew closer. Ethan stared out the clinic window, the sun casting long shadows over the pavement, much like the weight of his past loomed over his future. He flipped the sign on the door to closed, his work momentarily forgotten. Something within him stirred, not just worry for Sarah, but a burgeoning sense of purpose, igniting a flame within him that had long been dormant. He needed a plan. His first inclination was to drive to the estate immediately, but impatience bore no wisdom. He would need information, allies perhaps. The world Sarah inhabited was unfathomably distant from his own, filled with untold influences and toxic dealings, a place where he was ill-prepared to navigate. He took a deep breath, steeling his resolve. Ethan pulled out his phone and began searching. As articles on his father's luxury lifestyle painted a picture of gluttony and greed, he felt a mix of revulsion and duty swell within him. Each tap on the screen intensified the urgency pulsing through his veins. The estate was not just a mansion, it was a prison for Sarah, and its walls were designed to keep secrets hidden. How had he never acknowledged a sister's existence while his father's shadow loomed large over them both? He remembered their mother's quiet acceptance when she had spoken of their father's flaws, masking her own hurt. Guilt began gnawing at him anew. He was as much a product of that legacy as any child raised within the mansion's walls. Memories of furtive glances exchanged between his parents, the tentative moments when his mother had tried to shield him from their father's ambitions, bubbled to the surface. Ethan needed to confront these ghosts, but first he needed allies in this hidden war. After a few moments of deliberation, he reached out to Genevieve, an old friend from high school. She had her ear to the ground, particularly when it came to the affluent residents of their old town. It was risky to involve her, but he felt an almost primal need to connect to someone who could help him decode this world. "Ethan, it's been ages." Genevieve's voice was a balm against his spiraling thoughts. "Genevieve, I need your help." With each word, he felt himself teetering on the edge of vulnerability. "What's going on?" Her tone shifted from warmth to concern. He explained, keeping his voice steady despite the storms brewing inside him. At first, there was only silence on the other end. Then a long, deep breath. "You're serious?" she finally asked, disbelief evident. "More than I ever thought I'd be. I'm going to find Sarah." Her cautious support bolstered him. "Let me dig around. Don't make any moves until I can get you some intel. This is big." "I appreciate that," he replied, his heart racing, feeling the tenuous thread of hope beginning to weave into something more substantial. Once they hung up, he felt the weight of possibility settle on his shoulders. He might not be wealthy in coin, but knowledge was a currency he was beginning to grasp. With each passing moment, he felt his indecision fading, replaced by a burgeoning sense of urgency and purpose. He wasn't just trying to save Sarah, he was reclaiming his own identity. This time, he would not bend beneath the weight of someone else's legacy. He'd navigate through the darkness for his sister, but also to reveal the truth of their father's sins. It wasn't just her life dependent on his courage, it was his own. As he stepped outside, the brisk air invigorated him. The time had come to face not just his father's world, but the shadows that had plagued him for years. Life felt electric now, ringing with just enough tension to propel him forward into uncharted territory. Driven by both righteousness and a thirst for answers, he turned toward the city, where the estate awaited. Little did he know that reaching Sarah would be only half the battle, with unforgiving stakes ahead. What awaited him within the walls of that cold mansion would challenge everything he believed about family and loyalty. The thought jolted him. Was he truly prepared for what lay ahead? Ethan clenched his fists as he walked toward his car, determination coursing through him with each step. The city loomed before him, vast and unyielding, a stark contrast to the world he was about to plunge into. Shadows of uncertainty danced in his mind. He had always considered himself a man of simple means, content within the confines of his modest life. Yet now the pull of his lineage was hypnotic, drawing him deeper into the labyrinth of his father's empire. He needed a plan. Knowledge, Genevieve had said, was key. But what knowledge did he truly possess? As he drove through the sprawling streets, he replayed everything he had read. Wealth wasn't just about money. It was power, influence, manipulation. He began to formulate questions, thoughts that would serve as lanterns in the dark. What was Sarah's life really like? Who surrounded her, and who might be complicit in her captivity? What weaknesses existed within the fortress of luxury built on his father's selfishness? With each intersecting street, his anxiety twisted with anticipation. Ethan's instincts, honed through years of practice in the clinic, now turned toward an unfamiliar battleground. The ties of familial obligation were fierce, gripping him tightly, and yet the desire to protect Sarah burned brighter still. She deserved better. As he approached a secluded area of the city, he felt the pressure mount. The estate lay at the periphery of his thoughts, a monolithic figure representing secrets about the man who had sown discord into their lives. Confronting this would force him to confront not only the past, but the choices he carried with him. Did he truly want to unravel this fabric? He pulled into a parking lot near a cafe that Genevieve had mentioned, where high-net-worth individuals sometimes sought refuge disguised as ordinary patrons. He parked and took a deep breath, assessing the entrance. Disguises and pretense, it was a world he had avoided, yet an opportunity to uncover information shimmered just out of reach like a mirage. Upon entering, the ambiance washed over him, the cacophony of laughter and clinking glasses enveloping him like a soft blanket. He approached the counter, scanning the room. Were there signs of people who might know Sarah? Conversations swirled around him, fragments of sentences offering clues, woven with veiled intentions. "Can I help you?" a voice asked, breaking his trance. Ethan turned to face the barista, a friendly smile waiting for an order. "Just a coffee, please," he replied, trying to mask his racing thoughts. He paid, fingers trembling slightly as he collected his drink. Setting his sights on a secluded corner booth, he noticed a couple in hushed conversation, looking distinctly out of place. They had an air of subtle elegance and guarded speech patterns, the kind that suggested they could be gatekeepers to information he desperately needed. Tension danced in his chest. He had no plan to approach these strangers, but his instincts screamed at him to act. Deciding on impulse, he took a deep breath and wandered closer. As he neared, he caught snippets of their conversation, centering on a recent high-profile party at the estate. Sarah's name flitted through the air like a feather caught in the wind. Reacting instinctively, he leaned closer, his heart hammering. "What's going on with her? They say she's not allowed to see anyone," one of them murmured, concern lacing their voice. Ethan's pulse quickened. This was the moment. Without wasting a second, he interjected. "Excuse me, I couldn't help but overhear. Are you speaking about Sarah? I'm her brother." The chatter ceased abruptly as both turned their attention to him, surprise etched across their faces. They exchanged quick glances, one silently assessing him, while the other's green eyes flicked with recognition. "What do you know about her situation?" the woman asked, suspicion flickering alongside interest. Each second stretched painfully as he felt the enormity of his choice. This was the first step into a world he had barely begun to understand. Was he truly ready for the revelations she might share? With a surge of realization, he recognized this encounter could redefine his entire focus. The walls of their father's estate held not just Sarah's fate, but pathways to Ethan's own reckoning. The uncertainty of their family's fractured legacy began to crystallize into a sharper vision. He locked eyes with the woman, the gravity of his words heavy on his tongue. I need to know the truth. What weight would this truth hold, and at what cost? The woman's expression shifted, suspicion giving way to a flicker of empathy, as if Ethan's plea had reached deeper than mere inquiry. This newfound connection brought with it an unsettling clarity. Her voice was steady, but the gravity of the moment weighed palpably in the air between them. You might want to tread carefully. Information in this world isn't always free. Something ignited in Ethan, a blend of fear and audacity roiling in his gut. He had spent too long living a life defined by comfort and routine. Now, standing at the precipice of something far more complex, a raw determination surged within him. "I will do whatever it takes," he said, his tone ignited by conviction, unyielding. She gestured for him to sit, her demeanor shifting to a quieter intensity. "I've heard whispers. There's more at play here than just a simple existence. Your sister is—" her voice lowered, urgency interlaced with caution. "A pawn in a dangerous game." Ethan absorbed her words, a chill creeping down his spine. "What do you mean? Who is involved?" The other man, initially silent, leaned in, his gaze piercing. "Powerful people. Your father is not just a businessman. He engages in dealings that could shatter lives. Sarah, she's caught in the crossfire." Each revelation clawed at Ethan's understanding of his past. His father's wealth had never made him think of danger, only privilege. Now that illusion crumbled before him, replaced by the stark reality of betrayal and complicity. "Why would my father do this?" he questioned, his mind racing like a freight train barreling down an unlit track. The woman's eyes softened for a moment, recognition glittering there. "Because he can. Because people like him believe that power justifies any means. I've seen it happen to those who get too close." Her gaze flicked to the door, wary of potential listeners. "And those who challenge it often end up vanished." Ethan's fists clenched again. This was far beyond what he'd initially dared to imagine. Sarah was not merely trapped. She was a target in a ruthless arena. Anger coursed through him, mingling with adrenaline. "I can't let that happen to her." "You can't rush in blindly," the man interjected, assessing Ethan with a wary eye. "You'll need to gather intel, allies if you want a fighting chance. Knowledge is your weapon now." Ethan nodded, absorbing this new role he was stepping into, one that demanded both cunning and strategy. It would require a shift not just in tactics, but also in his identity. He was no longer just a brother. He was a force to be reckoned with, and he would navigate this unfamiliar, treacherous terrain until he unearthed the truth. Their conversation unfolded over the next hour, veiled threats becoming whispers of strength. He learned about the network of players surrounding his father's world, a web filled with deals, betrayals, and secrets. Each detail was something he could leverage, another piece of his burgeoning plan. Ethan's heart raced, fueled by clarity. With each murmur passing between them, he felt the shackles of his past undoing themselves, revealing a burgeoning strength in its place. "Is there more?" he asked finally, a surge of purpose igniting in him. "What else can I do?" The woman leaned forward again, conviction radiating off her. "You need to go back to that estate. You must confront your father, but do it on your terms. Equip yourself with information. Only then can you change Sarah's fate." Ethan took that in, resolve crystallizing. He had been thrust into this complex chess game, but unlike before, he recognized his own potential as a player. As he stood to leave, his heart hammered with a heady mix of anxiety and anticipation. The stakes had never been higher, and he felt ready to face whatever came next. Just as he stepped away, the woman called out after him, Remember, Ethan, unraveling the truth might lead to revelations that change everything you think you know about your family. Prepare yourself. With that warning echoing in his mind, Ethan's purpose sharpened. The confrontation awaited him, a doorway into his father's empire that promised to unravel dark truths and perhaps, ultimately, set Sarah free. But would he be prepared for the personal costs of those revelations? What would he discover in that marble fortress that threatened to change not just his perception of family, but his very identity? Ethan paused, heart drumming against his ribcage as he stepped onto the sidewalk, the weight of impending confrontation settling heavily over him. The city buzzed around him, alive and oblivious, as he mentally calculated the distance between himself and a legacy he had once idealized. Each block he traversed was a step deeper into a world he no longer recognized. He had long accepted a life of predictability, familiar work routines, and easy conversations. Now his existence felt like a Jenga tower, each piece crucial and precarious. He needed to brace himself. The path ahead threatened to topple everything he thought he knew about his family, his values, and most importantly, himself. Ethan turned a corner, determination rising. He pulled out his phone, scrolling through contacts, friends, acquaintances, anyone who could help. The realization struck him. Those relationships were superficial, built on the foundation of comfort. They weren't the allies he needed now. He needed savvy, connected individuals who understood the game his father played. His thoughts raced as he crossed a bustling intersection, merging chaos with clarity. He needed to outsmart, not just outmaneuver. A message pinged, a name he hadn't thought of in ages. Michael, an old college friend who had dabbled in investigative journalism. If anyone could sniff out the truth, it was him. Ethan texted, heart quickening with every keystroke. Need to talk, urgent. As he hit send, he felt a creeping doubt. Was this what it took to save Sarah? Relying on someone whom he hadn't connected with in years? But this wasn't about comfort. This was about survival. A survival that required shifting allegiances from the idle to the resourceful. It was a test of character, one that could either bind him closer to his world or sever ties completely. While awaiting a response, Ethan focused on preparing for the ultimate meeting with his father. The estate loomed like a castle haunted by secrets. Each ornate column and pristine lawn a facade for the dangers lurking beneath. He envisioned every detail of the encounter, the setup, the words, and the potential repercussions. How would his father respond? Would he feign ignorance, or would he confront? The air felt electric as his phone vibrated. Michael's reply read, "I'm in. When and where?" Relief washed over him. He wasn't entirely alone in this. Quickly, Ethan set a time to meet, confidence surging through him. That sense of isolation had begun to dissolve, replaced by a creeping realization. He was capable of forging connections that could destabilize his father's empire. Yet with this laborious build-up, another question twisted in his gut. Was he ready to hear the truth? As evening descended, Ethan paced his apartment, piecing together research on his father's business dealings. He printed documents and highlighted names linked to shady contracts and suspicious figures. Every artifact of newfound knowledge reignited a flame of purpose. He was no longer a passive participant in his life's narrative. The night stretched before him, a mixture of uncertainty and resolute determination. He knew confronting his father would yield both answers and deep personal costs. What might unravel? Would truth lead to redemption or ruin? He needed to tread carefully, as the truth never surfaced without sacrifice. Ethan halted, crossing his arms, the weight of his decision crashing down on him. But today, those moments had transformed into something sinister. Finally, he exited the vehicle and approached the entrance, settling the folder under his arm like a shield. The door swung open, revealing the polished splendor inside and the oppressive aura of authority held by his father. The hallway stretched interminably ahead, decorated with achievements that felt more like trophies of deceit than honors. "Ethan," his father greeted, a bemused smile creeping onto his face. It felt like a mask, an invitation wrapped in condescension. "Dad," Ethan replied, steeling his voice, "we need to talk." His father's demeanor shifted, the momentary warmth extinguished as they moved to the study. The air crackled with tension, silence hanging for a heartbeat too long. Ethan placed the folder on the desk, challenging his father with a clear gaze, a direct confrontation building. "You have secrets," Ethan ventured, his pulse quickening, "and it's time we discuss them. You might think these dealings are just business, but they're destroying lives, our lives." For a moment, his father's expression faltered, confusion briefly flickering across his face. It was an opening, a moment for Ethan to tether his voice to his burgeoning strength. With each accusation he laid bare, he felt himself unshackling years of shame and anger, carving away at the legacy that had suffocated him. "Your business practices, your partnerships, they're not just numbers on a balance sheet. They hold real power over real people. You've lost your way." The retort came quick, but for the first time, Ethan stood firm. "I won't allow your empire to swallow Sarah or anyone else. This facade ends here." As the words hung heavily in the charged atmosphere, Ethan felt a palpable shift within himself. This wasn't solely about his father's empire. This was about breaking free from the expectations that had tethered him for too long. The answer to his haunting question dawned upon him. The truth, while dangerous, was also empowering. His father's face hardened, the familiar mask slipping into a grimace. "Do you have any idea what you're risking?" Ethan paused, contemplating the price he was willing to pay. Fear clashed with resolve as he weighed the sacrifices against the redemption he sought. He realized this was no turning back. This was the precipice of his liberation. "More than you can imagine," he replied, the steel in his voice reverberating like an incantation of newfound courage. As the confrontation surged, the echoes of the past began to fade, replaced by a burgeoning understanding of who he was becoming. With every assertion, he dismantled the structures that had upheld his father's empire, uncovering truths he had yet to fully grasp. Just as he felt the weight of isolation transform into the solidarity of purpose, a sudden realization crashed upon him. The meeting was far from over. It had only just begun. The true battle lay not with his father, but within himself. His father's face hardened, the familiar mask slipping into a grimace. "Do you have any idea what you're risking?" Ethan paused, contemplating the price he was willing to pay. Fear clashed with resolve as he weighed the sacrifices against the redemption he sought. He realized this was no turning back. This was the precipice of his liberation. "More than you can imagine," he replied, the steel in his voice reverberating like an incantation of newfound courage. As the confrontation surged, the echoes of the past began to fade, replaced by a burgeoning understanding of who he was becoming. With every assertion, he dismantled the structures that had upheld his father's empire, uncovering truths he had yet to fully grasp. Just as he felt the weight of isolation transform into the solidarity of purpose, a sudden realization crashed upon him. The meeting was far from over. It had only just begun. The true battle lay not with his father, but within himself. Would he emerge from the rubble of confrontation as the architect of his own legacy, or would the shadows of his father's empire engulf him once more? What awaited him on the other side of this truth would unveil so much more than he anticipated. Ethan's heart raced as he faced his father, the air thick with tension and the weight of unsaid words. Each second seemed to stretch, elongating the confrontation into something almost surreal. Where once his father had instilled a sense of loyalty, now those feelings twisted like vines around his resolve. He was at a crossroads, teetering on the edge of a precipice of self-discovery. "What you don't understand," his father began, his voice tight, "is that what I built required sacrifices, real ones. You think you can just walk in here and challenge that?" The condescension stung, but it also galvanized Ethan. He stood taller, his fingers brushing the folder on the desk, the documentation representing his resolve. "No, Dad, I understand all too well. Those sacrifices aren't just numbers in your ledger. They're human lives affected by decisions made in this room." His father's expression shifted, not the fluster of shock this time, but something colder, a calculated irritation. "You don't know the first thing about running a business. You think ideals mean anything in this world? Show me one empire built on good intentions, Ethan." "You really don't get it," Ethan replied, the anger fueling a surge of clarity. "I'm not here to inherit your empire. I'm here because I want to destroy your legacy, to start over. You've mistaken greed for power, and I won't allow that to continue." The tension boiled over. Silence fell hard, the kind that makes even a whisper feel intrusive. Ethan's father leaned back, arms crossed, assessing him, targeting weaknesses buried beneath the bravado. "You're dangerously naive. You think tearing this down will fix things? You'll only make enemies, Ethan. You're already one of them." A rush of adrenaline flooded Ethan's system. The sense of inevitability surged as he pinned his gaze firmly on his father's. "Then let's start with you. If I can't change you, I will change your empire." The declaration hung in the air, reverberating like a bell tolling for all he had begun to unleash. It wasn't just a matter of business tactics, but a deeply personal reflection of a battle against inherited values. He felt his courage rising, twisting away from the fear ingrained in him since childhood. Each word separated him further from the boy who sought approval. Ethan barely registered his own thoughts as he navigated the conversation, strategic yet wary. Each question aimed to dismantle the fortress of his convictions. "What about Sarah? Did you ever consider how this impacts our family? What you do puts lives on the line, including those you claim to protect." At the mention of Sarah, an unsettling flicker passed through his father's eyes. Vulnerability? Regret? It was gone in an instant, replaced by the familiar fortress of indifference. "This is business, Ethan. It was never about family. Don't let the illusion of sentiment cloud your judgment. It's a harsh world, and you need to toughen up." But Ethan realized then that weakness, when spun into vulnerability, was a tool for change. He felt a new determination rising. "No, Dad, I won't harden my heart. I will forge my own path. You may have shaped my past, but the future is mine to construct. It ends now." His confession was a crack in the armor of their long dominant narrative, a moment of clarity breaking through years of conditioning. Suddenly, it seemed he was no longer fighting just for others. The fight had become intrinsic to his self-worth. Yet deep down, dread began to coil around his spirit. Would his decision to confront his father lead to isolation? Would dismantling this empire leave him more vulnerable?
He had gripped the sword, but would the cut sever ties irrevocably? In that instant, Ethan knew. Confrontation was only the beginning. It was time to plan his future, to gather allies on this treacherous journey. The real challenge lay ahead, a daunting unknown cloaked in uncertainty. As the embers of confrontation cooled, Ethan felt the pull of destiny urging him forth. The stakes were layered and dangerous, and he prepared to wage the battle not only against his father, but within his own conscience. With every decision ahead, the specter of failure loomed large. The question was no longer simply about confrontation. It would become a test of resilience and unwavering purpose. What would he sacrifice to gain the freedom he sought? How far would he go to break the chains of expectation? Outside, thunder rumbled ominously, echoing the tempest within. A choice loomed, one that would determine not just his legacy, but his very identity. The path was set, but what awaited him in this newfound conflict would alter everything once again. In the aftermath of his confrontation, Ethan found himself pacing the quiet confines of his apartment. The soft glow of the city's lights through the window juxtaposed with the turmoil inside him. Each step echoed the resolve building within. He was no longer the frightened boy seeking approval, but a man understanding the stakes of his life. He paused in front of the glass table, papers strewn like the scattered thoughts in his mind. The folder he had clutched during the confrontation weighed heavily on him, a tangible reminder of the choices he was preparing to make. His father's disdain hung in the air, a bitter fog he watched as it drifted, threatening to cloud his next move. Studying the documentation laid out before him, Ethan recognized his initial plan was less a blueprint and more a tentative sketch. He needed to convert these ideals into action. The thought of sitting idly while the empire of ambition loomed over him felt more suffocating than liberating. Quiet determination washed over him.
It was time to gather not only information, but allies, like-minded individuals willing to challenge the status quo, who could support him in dismantling the twisted foundation his father had built. But who would stand with him? The question gnawed at his confidence. He remembered the conversations he had shared with trusted friends, moments where tiny seeds of doubt had whispered their way into his mind. A mix of professional acquaintances and lifelong friends, he needed to determine who might possess the courage to face the implications of his rebellion. As he picked up his phone, sweat forming at his brow, he hesitated. The risk of reaching out felt monumental. Would they dismiss his vision, brand him a fool for wanting to upend the long-standing traditions? Yet ignoring it would resign him to a future woven from strands of inheritance instead of choice. Ethan took a deep breath, dialing the number of Jacob, a close friend with undeniable business acumen. "Hey, Ethan, long time," Jacob responded, his tone warm but cautious. "We need to talk," Ethan urged, coating his voice with urgency. "It's about my father's corporation." A moment of silence hung like a pendulum, and Ethan could almost measure Jacob's disbelief. What about it? The next few minutes became a pivotal moment for Ethan. As he divulged his plans and shared his aspirations, the conversation stretched into uncharted territory, exposing layers of vulnerability he had kept hidden. Jacob listened, offering feedback, probing thoughts, but most importantly, he asked the questions Ethan had feared might unravel him. "What's your end goal, Ethan? What are you truly hoping to achieve? You know this is a dangerous game. What happens if you lose?" With each question, Ethan felt the sharpness of clarity cutting through the fog threatening to engulf him. This wasn't simply about tearing down that which his father had built. It was a quest for authenticity he couldn't shy away from.
By the end of the conversation, Jacob's counsel transformed into a pact. He expressed a willingness to help Ethan navigate this labyrinthian landscape. Fueled by newfound partnership, Ethan transitioned from nervous anticipation to a fierce determination that coursed through his veins. He visualized possible paths forward, strategizing each step he would take against the powerful machinery his father represented. This would not be a simple battle, it was a war of ideologies. Days turned into weeks as he prepared for the impending conflict. Each meeting with Jacob plunged them deeper into the nuances of business, a realm Ethan had barely waded into until now. They explored finance, ethics, and the multitude of ways to effectuate change. Knowledge transformed from an abstract concept into a tool, one he could wield. Amidst the whirlwind of ideas, Ethan realized he was gaining more than just professional insights. He was unearthing hidden competencies within himself.
Each obstacle dissected brought revelations about his resilience and creativity, skills buried under the weight of his past. Ada, another acquaintance with a strong moral compass, joined their cause, igniting hope and collaborative energy in their small coalition. However, looming questions about what identity he would forge began to cloud his vision. If he succeeded in dismantling his father's empire, what legacy would he leave behind? Could he face the fallout from those who found value in the very system he planned to topple? Outside his window, the city pulsed with life, a stark contrast to the turbulence within. Just as he felt the weight of despair creeping in, a thought struck him. Perhaps he would not just dismantle a legacy, but redefine what it meant to lead. But as ambition grew, so did the reality that true change required sacrifice, and there remained a specter of uncertainty connected to those choices. Would he lose friendships and connections entrenched in his father's world? The specter of isolation loomed large, tempting him to retreat, but ultimately catalyzing him to confront his fate head-on. The time for quiet planning was over. He prepared for the next confrontation, the decision to face his father not just for the sake of his own beliefs, but to challenge a system that had perpetuated inequality. Fate had pushed him into the fray, and the question lingered, begging for resolution. Would he emerge unscathed, or would the pursuit of authenticity come at an unimaginable cost? Ethan awoke the next morning with a jolt, the urgency of his mission pressing against his chest like a weight that refused to lift. Today wasn't just another day, it was a pivotal juncture, a moment drenched in purpose. He had decided to invite Jacob and Ada to strategize their approach before confronting his father. But doubts flickered at the edges of his resolve. What if they questioned his motives? What if they saw him as a man grappling with naivety rather than ambition? He prepared himself for the meeting with meticulous care. As he dressed in crisp, tailored clothing that somewhat mirrored the corporate armor he despised, the reflection staring back was both alien and empowering. This was the new Ethan, a man redefining his trajectory, yet still tethered by the very legacy he sought to dismantle. At the cafe where they agreed to meet, the atmosphere buzzed with conversations and the aroma of freshly brewed coffee. Ethan arrived early, a storm of thoughts crashing in waves against his mind. And yet, as he settled into a corner table, the tension began to settle. He was constructing a narrative, one where he wasn't merely the heir of his father's empire, but the architect of a new legacy that could break the cycle of exploitation. Jacob arrived first, a confident stride marking his entrance. "You look serious," he smiled, keen eyes scanning Ethan's demeanor. "Because I am," Ethan replied, leaning into his newfound assertiveness.
It's time to map out our next steps. We can't afford to be tentative. Ada soon joined, her presence casting a warm glow that lightened the atmosphere. As they exchanged greetings, Ethan noticed a flicker of hope igniting within him, a desire to harness their combined strengths. Fueling this strategic meeting was an undercurrent of camaraderie. They were in this together. As the trio dove into discussions, ideas flowed like water from a faucet, moving seamlessly from potential tactics to ethical implications. Jacob laid out a proposal to gather more intelligence on rival companies that could support their cause. Ada pushed for a communication strategy focused on transparency, an element they could exploit to contrast their ideals with the corporate machinations of Ethan's father. Transparency and accountability can be our sword and shield, Ada said, her voice resonating strength. People want authenticity. They will rally behind a cause if it feels genuine. Ethan nodded, captivated by her conviction. Here was a woman exuding the spirit of change he sought to capture. Yet the shadow of doubt loomed once more. Would the same transparency expose their weaknesses? As he considered their plan, he felt the gnaw of apprehension tightening around his resolve. "Are we prepared for the backlash?" Ethan asked, voicing the doubt that threatened to disrupt their momentum. "We risk not only our personal lives, but potential discrediting in this industry." "Every revolution carries risk, Ethan," Jacob interjected. "It's essential we understand that our message must be louder than any dissent." Ethan absorbed the gravity of Jacob's assertion. This was more than about his father. It was about framing the discourse of power dynamics within an industry that thrived on obscurity and manipulation. As they delved deeper, his confidence burgeoned. Ideas transformed into action steps, each suggestion building upon the last. They left the cafe energized, but the culmination of their efforts brought him to a new dilemma. Suddenly, amidst their excitement, a troubling vision struck him. What if they succeeded, only to face disillusionment from the very people they sought to empower? Personal morals collided with public perception, and as doubts crested, he bit back an urge to retreat. To face the truth was to confront isolation, not just from his father, but from the corporate allies who might feel betrayed. Driving home, Ethan replayed the day's conversations, a pattern emerging before him. They weren't just strategy discussions, they were a mosaic of shared vulnerability, hope, and courage. And yet the looming confrontation with his father gnawed at him, each second bringing him closer to the reality he was determined to reshape. When he finally parked, the city's glow dimmed against the weight of his thoughts. What revelations awaited him behind closed doors?
Behind the power suit and polished shroud, what truths would his father spout in defense of a corrupt establishment? The duration seemed an eternity, and yet something important flickered at the back of his mind, a call to action emerging from his fears. With resolve thickening around him, he stepped out of the car. He would face his father, not just as a rebellious son, but as a man prepared for battle. The final piece he needed was locked away in the heart of their confrontation, and he wondered, would he find himself within the rubble of a shattered legacy, or would the pursuit of authenticity unlock a truth he had yet to embrace? Ethan stood before the grand facade of the estate, the weight of his impending confrontation coursing through him like electricity. Striding past the imposing gates, he felt the echo of past family gatherings, the hollow laughter now transformed into a visceral reminder of the family ties he desperately sought to redefine. This wasn't just about his sister anymore. It was about breaking free from the specter of his father's control that had held him down for far too long. As he ascended the marble steps, determination solidified within him. Today marked a critical turning point, not merely the confrontation of an estranged father, but the declaring of his own identity. He had evolved from a conflicted son craving acceptance into a man ready to challenge the toxic legacy that had defined his upbringing. The opulent doors swung open, revealing the familiar corridors drenched in extravagance, yet tainted by the shadow of greed. His father awaited him in the study, a room adorned with symbols of power.
This was the very seat of authority that had for years orchestrated the chaos around him. Ethan. The coolness in his father's greeting reminded him of the chasm that had grown between them, but today that chasm would serve as a foundation for his new identity. "Dad, we need to talk," Ethan stated, every word laced with conviction, each syllable punctuated by the resolve to shatter the constraints of expectation. "What could you possibly offer me, Ethan?" his father smirked, still draped in the robes of arrogance and entitlement. Ethan took a breath, grounding himself in the knowledge he had gathered and the change he sought. "This isn't about what I can offer you. It's about what you've taken from others. It's about your greed and its consequences." His father's expression hardened. The warmth he once wore as a facade melted away, revealing the grim reality underneath. "You don't know what it takes to build an empire. You've been sheltered from the truth," he shot back, disbelief hand in hand with defensive aggression. But every defensive retort pushed Ethan deeper into his purpose. "I've witnessed the consequences, Dad. I've seen the wreckage of lives you've trampled on. Sarah is just one victim of your ruthless ambition. How many others are there?"
Ethan's boldness hung heavily in the air, producing a palpable shift. His father shifted in his seat, a flicker of uncertainty breaking through the mask he had worn for years. The vulnerability he had once dismissed was now etched into his father's furrowed brow. "What do you want from me, Ethan?" The question, devoid of his earlier bravado, cut through the tension like a knife. "I want you to understand that your legacy isn't worth the human cost behind it." Ethan pushed forward, channeling every ounce of strength he could muster. "I'm tired of living in your shadow. I refuse to inherit your empire built on exploitation." "What are you suggesting?" his father demanded, his voice now lacking its habitual confidence. Ethan stepped forward, placing the folder, the culmination of his research and revelations, upon the desk. "I have the evidence of your dealings, the manipulation, the victims left in your wake. It's time to put an end to this." In that moment, as the gravity of his words settled in, he felt an unexpected surge of liberation. This was not just a battle against his father. This was a battle for his own identity, an assertion that he would not be defined by inherited sins. His father's face contorted, a cocktail of anger and disbelief flaring in his eyes. "You think you can dismantle everything I've built? I already have, just by recognizing the truth," Ethan replied, voice steady and unwavering. "Your empire is a house of cards, and I will show everyone what you've hidden beneath the surface." The room grew silent, the weight of the confrontation settling thickly between them. Ethan could feel the edges of his father's crumbling facade through the layers of shock and fury. He could feel the possibility of redemption burgeoning just beyond this moment. "I don't expect you to agree with me, but know this: I'm not going anywhere without a fight, and I'll reclaim Sarah. I've already begun to gather the forces of accountability and courage around me. Who do you think will support you? Your pathetic friends?" His father's voice dripped with disdain, yet it lacked the conviction that had previously accompanied his words. "They believe in change because I believe in it, and they're willing to stand beside me," Ethan countered, an undeniable spark igniting within him. "I'm done being afraid of your power. The truth will come out." His father's demeanor faltered. The realization that he could no longer chain his son's spirit appeared etched in the lines on his face. As Ethan stood before him, he felt the chains of his own past disintegrating, leaving room for self-defined purpose and authenticity. In that charged silence, the fracture within their relationship morphed into a launching point for Ethan. Whatever fallout awaited him paled in comparison to claiming his own agency. The confrontation had not been easy, but it revealed the undeniable notion within him. He would no longer be a pawn in this corrupt game. He would rewrite the rules. As he turned to leave, each step echoed the power of transformation. He would confront his father again, but this time as a participant in his own destiny, not a bystander in someone else's game. The encounter had birthed a new understanding, both within himself and in the legacy he would create. The shackles of his father's expectations dissipated, replaced by the firm resolve to place his sister's future in his own hands. It was time to act, to reclaim his sister and dismantle the empire that threatened to destroy countless lives. The clarity of purpose throbbed in his veins, urging him forward. A chapter of resilience unfolding before him like pages in a book he was finally ready to write. With that clarity guiding him, Ethan stepped into his new reality, one crafted from the ashes of confrontation, infused with the promise of redemption. Now the real battle would commence, and within it, Ethan recognized his power to change not just his fate, but the trajectory of his family's legacy. And so he declared to the universe, "This is just the beginning." You need to subscribe now to ensure you don't miss the next exclusive emotional stories that will continue to unfold on this channel. Leave a like now to feed the algorithm. Your support makes a difference. Comment with your reactions and theories about Ethan's journey and what comes next. Don't wait even one more second to share this video with at least 5 friends who need to see this conclusion. Let's spread the message of personal empowerment and transformation far and wide.